All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rosey Radmanovich, and I'm a watershed planning coordinator with the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance, and I'm joined by my colleague, Kelsie Norton, and we're going to be co-presenting today on some of the work that NSWA has been doing in the area of salt management. Next slide, please. All right, so just to kind of go over the outline of our presentation today, so we're going to talk a little bit about who the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance is and what we do, and then we're going to dive into some of the work done by the Sturgeon Watershed Alliance around salt management. So, some of the stuff that we plan to talk about today has been covered by other people, mostly Brad, but something that hasn't come up yet is what the meaning of a watershed is. So when we talk about watersheds, thank you. I'm going to forget to ask him to advance my slides. So when we talk about a watershed, it's also known as a basin, like a drainage basin. So you can think of it as a big land funnel that collects all of the water and precipitation that falls in an area and funnels it to a point, to a low-lying point. So when we talk about watershed planning and management, we're really looking at the activities and the land uses that are happening out on the landscape, because there's that connection where what happens on the land affects the water. And so in order to kind of mitigate some of those effects and to increase our water quality, we need to think about what's happening on the landscape, because as that water is running over the land, it's picking up all of the stuff and it's ending up in our water. So to understand who the WPACs are, so the Watershed Planning and Advisory Councils, who we are and what we do, back in 2003, the province of Alberta created the Water for Life strategy, and the strategy has three main goals. I was like, yes. So safe, secure drinking water, healthy aquatic ecosystems, and reliable water supplies for a sustainable economy. And so to meet these goals, the Government of Alberta actually kind of took a pretty unique approach. So instead of creating departments that would kind of lead all of this work, they established a number of external arm's-length not-for-profits, and they pursued strategic partnerships. So through this, 11 watershed planning and advisory councils were created across the province and were tasked with watershed planning. So the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance, or NSWA, is one of them. And so as a key partner in Water for Life, we also work closely with the Alberta Water Council, and so their piece of the puzzle is providing provincial scale policy advice. And the Government of Alberta, they hold the responsibility and the accountability. And then all the local watershed stewardship groups who do such great work to focus on kind of local issues and projects as they relate to watershed health. So as you can see on this, maybe you can't see it great on this map right now, but every major river system in the province has a WPAC, and so they're independent nonprofit organizations that undertake watershed management and planning, and we provide technical expertise and collaborate with watershed stakeholders. So a little bit about the North Saskatchewan River watershed. So it begins at the Saskatchewan Glacier in Banff National Park in the Rocky Mountains, and then it winds and bends east through Alberta, where it eventually meets the South Saskatchewan River near Prince Albert, and then it continues east and eventually ends up in the Hudson's Bay. And so the watershed is 57,000 kilometers squared, and there's a population of more than 1.6 million people within its borders. And so one of the things that you can see on this map is that watersheds drain into other watersheds. So the North Saskatchewan watershed is actually made up of 12 smaller subwatersheds, and so they're shown on this map. So as a Watershed Planning and Advisory Council, we're tasked with three key responsibilities. So we report on the health of watersheds, we lead and facilitate collaborative planning, and we facilitate and engage in education and stewardship activities. So back in 2005, NSWA created our State of the Watershed report, which basically takes a snapshot of watershed health. And three of our sub-watersheds actually kind of showed that they were facing more challenges with watershed health than some of the others. So we created three sub-watershed alliances to really kind of focus in on those local issues. So we facilitate and support the Headwaters Alliance, the Sturgeon River Watershed Alliance, and the Vermilion River Watershed Alliance. And I will mention that we're actually updating our State of the Watershed report right now, since was back in 2005, so maybe we'll see that things have changed. Stay tuned. So each Sub-Watershed Alliance is led by a steering committee of municipal partners in collaboration with nonprofits and other stakeholders to address those local watershed issues. And we also support various lake stewardship groups throughout the watershed in their work to support and address local watershed issues. So just a little bit of context and background on the work that's been undertaken by, namely, the Sturgeon Watershed Alliance, but also NSWA. So Brad kind of talked about this study already, and he did such a great job of explaining it, but basically when you think about the issue of salt on the landscape, it is at that continental context. It's bigger than just one lake or one river or one watershed. It's what this study showed is that you're seeing this increasing trend basically across the northern part of North America. And so we're seeing this trend echoed in the North Saskatchewan River as well. And so Patrick Laceby with Alberta Environment and Protected Areas, I was like, I always want to say park still, has been researching trends and patterns of salinity in the North Saskatchewan River for the last couple of years. And some key findings of his research are that chloride actually increases by 5.5 times downstream of the city of Edmonton. So kind of linking back to that paper that kind of showed that, you know, the more salt you're applying and the more kind of paved surfaces you have, you kind of see a higher trend of increase in salinity. And so that's relative to the upstream sites. And so freshwater systems at home and across the continent are getting saltier. Where does that salt come from and how does it enter water bodies? So the research by Patrick Laceby actually broke down kind of the sources in the North Saskatchewan River and showed that road de-icers account for about 54%, and that about 20% of the salts, it's estimated, come from agriculture, including potash from fertilizer and urine from livestock, and then along with wastewater treatment plant and industrial effluent accounting for about 15%. So there's multiple sources, and they're all deposited on the landscape, and because of that connection on the watershed scale between the land and the water, they all end up getting picked up and end up in the water, or even sometimes directly discharged in some instances, such as wastewater facilities. And so freshwater systems at home and across the continent are getting saltier, so why do we care? And so as Brad mentioned, chloride dissolves in water really easily, it's highly mobile, and it's not easily removed. So currently, even our current wastewater technologies that are employed, they don't remove the salts, right? Like, you're not gonna remove salt through settling or like anything other than nanofiltration. It's basically reverse osmosis. So you're getting into, like, when you think of how we would desalinate ocean water in order to make it drinkable, it's very cost prohibitive and it's a lot of technology to do it. So if you think about, yeah, like most of our wastewater treatment plants and especially lagoons where you're focusing on filtration and settling and biological processes, you're not gonna be able to remove that salt. Okay, oh, and then getting a little ahead of myself. And so as Brad mentioned, there's a ton of environmental impacts. So it doesn't only cause short and long-term negative impacts to water, it's also to your soil and to your vegetation, right? Like there was some discussion in our group this morning that where road salts are applied, you can see that the vegetation along the side of the road is in really rough shape because that salt just, it impacts the vegetation and the soil. And so something to note is that different frequencies and different magnitudes of application will also alter freshwater communities and have an impact. And research indicates that chlorides decrease the biodiversity of aquatic animals and plants, and sometimes even favor the growth of certain species of phytoplankton, especially your cyanobacteria that contribute to those blue-green algae blooms. So now to get a little bit more into the details about the work that NSWA has done, Kelsie is going to talk about the work undertaken by the Sturgeon River Watershed Alliance.
Thank you, Rosie. So you definitely covered what the Sub-Watershed Alliances do. So municipally supported. I will highlight it's guided by a steering committee, as well as a technical advisory committee made up of municipal staff and invited experts in different groups. And definitely being biased, so I live in the Sturgeon River watershed, so I always kind of like to highlight it. So as mentioned, the NSWA or the watershed can be broken down into 12 sub-watersheds. So the Sturgeon River sub-watershed is one of those. It's fed by snowmelt and prairie-fed river. So I think, yeah, we've kind of discussed a lot of kind of opinions on how the quality of water is kind of like, why isn't it clear? So it's not glacial fed by any means. But yeah, it travels definitely a long distance through a lot of major water bodies and lakes, as well as kind of small municipalities, as well as some major urban areas such as St. Albert. And so how a lot of this started was the city of St. Albert actually commissioned a state of report for the Sturgeon River watershed. And kind of that, so yeah, as mentioned, it kind of summarizes the current knowledge of the Sturgeon River watershed and kind of comments on its environmental integrity. So the data collected was used in the report from water quality, land use, land cover, agriculture information from various governmental agencies, select data pertaining to biological indicators as well. So unfortunately, the overall health was assessed as fair. So that was based on the average of 15 indicators. And 3 were ranked as poor. And so yeah, how do we kind of start to address that? So one of the actions that was highlighted in there was to reduce the amount of pollutants entering the watershed, such as fertilizer, pesticides, and road salts through monitoring and education. So the NSWA is actually seeking a sub-basin planning group for the Sturgeon River to undertake specific planning and on-the-ground initiatives for the basin. And the role of the NSWA, and this was to bridge the organizations and provide the kind of critical linkages between the science and policy, community and government, and stewardship as well. So following after the SRWA is formed, numerous reports were completed to fill the knowledge gaps from the state of. So in 2020, the SRW developed the Sturgeon River Watershed Management Plan and presented as information and advice only, and an action indicated in this plan was to reduce sediment and salt loading by promoting transportation and road best management practices such as the Alberta Transportation and the Transportation Association of Canada guidelines, federally required salt management plans, and snow facilities meltwater best practices. So highlighting one of the technical reports that kind of was a trigger for the salinity and chloride was commissioned by the SRWA commissioned CPP Environmental to conduct the SRWA's aquatic health assessment. This report identified salinity, in particular chloride concentrations, as an issue in some parts of the Sturgeon River, as well as Carrot Creek exceeded Alberta surface water quality guidelines for the protection of aquatic life. So some of the salinity may be a result of a concentration within the groundwater, so that's always one thing we wanted to consider, natural versus kind of human-induced causes. And one of the recent ones that we've actually been doing that's been led by Tetra Tech, so they did a water quality program along the Sturgeon River. And unfortunately, once again, some of the chloride concentrations were kind of at that long-term chronic concentrations, but I will highlight there is kind of what Bradley said. Yeah, you don't want to definitely keep that as like a benchmark to get approached to. You want to keep it definitely within that, but there's also the 640 milligrams per liter, which is the short-term acute conditions. So this provides guidance, kind of monitoring and reporting. So we are currently waiting actually the final report from them. So we have actually a presentation coming up from them shortly that will kind of highlight some of the trends and a lot of actually the historical water quality results. So we look forward to hearing the final report from that. So just recently, we decided to do a municipal scan of road salt and snow management in the Sturgeon River sub-watershed. We did this to identify policy gaps as well as best management practices, and honestly just to highlight a lot of the great work that's already being done. So we compiled road density throughout the watershed, kind of a summary breakdown at the bottom, kind of, yeah, as you can see in the graph there. So ultimately, this kind of provided a starting point and a discussion basis for a lot of people to build on existing resources and tools to kind of make it easier for communities to kind of take that extra step in creating salt management plans and policies. And part of this was also a municipal survey, sorry. So interestingly enough, 70% have salt management policies, 80% had plans, 50% actually know how much salt is used, so obviously there's a little bit of a gap there. 60% have storage facilities, so I think this is kind of an interesting one. So it definitely being a trigger as to you don't want it to leach into the surrounding areas, and to consider, you know, are you around any water bodies or maybe a groundwater recharging area? And 0%, unfortunately, know if they if they report salt and sand usage to Environment Canada. So I think that's again kind of above and beyond, but it's still kind of good to know. So from this, salt became an ECCC priority substance in the early 2000s, as mentioned, and at a certain rate of application, municipalities are legally required to have salt management plans. However, a lot of people being in summer villages and kind of around these like really important water bodies, it is something to consider, as you know, you have a kind of a precious resource in your backyard. So Parkland County was a great example. They developed a salt management policy. So instead of having every community kind of go and invest a lot of time and energy, we actually created a template from theirs. And as you can see, it kind of can get broken down. And a lot of these resources you can find on our website. And ultimately, yeah, guiding the alignment is a big one for plans and policies among municipalities in the Sturgeon River watershed. And as well, we have a salt management template. So once again, not to kind of duplicate efforts, we have this based off the City of Leduc's salt management plan and incorporating some information from Transport Canada's recommendations. It's 11 pages long, but once again, it's a starting point for a lot of communities. It's a lot of fill in the blanks, but as you can see, there's different highlighted areas where it kind of needs a little bit of work. And it's obviously recommended to have relevant tables and figures incorporated into your plans and policies. And best management practices, a big highlight. So we created a few different types of communication resources that can be used by municipalities, watershed stewardship groups, and just kind of another tool in the toolbox for a lot of people to use as that educational piece and kind of awareness of why this is an issue. So kind of some BMPs around storage and disposal, as well as salt application. And some guiding next steps and action items. So the salt management plan all the way down to kind of how to apply it properly. And then I think, yeah, we've also had the discussion on a lot of stuff that kind of happens on people's backyards as they have kind of the right and know-how around applying it on their sidewalks, and there's also trails. So all these different considerations can be considered. And lastly, to stay connected, I have my, maybe just Rosey should put our emails there.
Yours is on this
slide. Yeah, so to stay connected, I definitely recommend that you check out our website. We have different types of social media that you can follow, that we have a lot of this information available. And then we also have our newsletter, but we do look forward to, I think, yeah, as you mentioned, we're hoping to have a salt management workshop as well in January. So we look forward to kind of, yeah, bringing together a lot of sub-watershed alliances, public works, a lot of the boots on the ground to talk about, you know, who's doing what, how can we kind of relate it to kind of those best management practices and the sharing of information.